So I just finished Quake. Alright, so this is something kind of new that I'm doing for my channel here. Obviously not every game that I play is going to be something that I have enough interesting points about to make like a full produced, scripted, got jokes in it video, you know? Not everything's going to be a full review, you know? Not everything just has enough interesting to say about it to support that. That's just the way it is. But I play a lot of games, and I'm going to continue playing a lot of games, and there's no way to tell before I start playing a game whether I'll have enough interesting to say about it. Which means that there's no way to like ensure that I'm playing things, that I'm getting like a game that I can really review at a steady rate as I'm playing, you know? I just gotta kind of play stuff and hope. So that wouldn't be good for my channel, for like being able to upload stuff pretty regularly and being able to keep content moving. You know, it'd be not great for you guys, the viewers, because you guys would be getting much more sporadic and less frequent content, and it'd be bad for me because you guys would be getting much more sporadic and less frequent content, which would be bad for how the YouTube algorithm would treat me. So I came up with a way that I can make content out of every game that I play, even if it's not something that I can make a full review out of. If I finish a game and actually, you know, no, I kind of had like a fuzzy idea of how this is going to be, but I'm setting it in stone now. Every time I finish a game, I'm going to do a So I Just Played video about it, which is like a little unscripted vlog where I just talk about my impressions of the game having just beaten it. And you know, if the game is interesting enough that I can actually like go like in depth with it into like a proper review and have it be interesting, then I'll do that in addition to this. But this will be like my first, you know, just cover the basics video about it. And this way, every time I finish a game, I'll immediately be able to get some content up about it because I won't have to spend a lot of time scripting. I can just sit down in front of a microphone with my notes that I took while I was playing the game about the most interesting and worthwhile bits to talk about, and I can just talk about them. That's what I got in front of me right now. I got my notes on Quake. I just finished Quake. It's a pretty good game. It's not as good as Doom, not by a long shot. It's pretty cool though. So yeah, I've just got a list of bullet points here, and I'm just gonna go down the bullet points and you know kind of talk about each one. These are gonna be divided into kind of broad sections. By the way, if you start listening to this and you start to feel like this concept of like the idea of a video where you beat the game and you just do an unscripted, very minimal effort video on it just to like kind of have content from having played it, is a bit of a ripoff of Hypocrite's GRPJ series. Yes, that's exactly what this is. That is, I'm not going to pretend that it's not. Go watch GRPJ, it's probably better than this. Also watch all of Hypocrite's videos because they're better than mine. But back on topic, Quake. This is going to be divided into broad categories. Category the first is gameplay, just all about the mechanics and the feel and how it flows and how it moves. Category the second, the aesthetics and the story and the general context, the sort of the elements of the game that aren't direct mechanical things, but instead are just these peripheral, there we go, peripheral elements that do affect the experience, but aren't what you're like here for, you know, because when you play Quake, you're here for the gameplay, let's be honest. Segment the third will be just me talking about, like, breaking down each individual episode of Quake and what I think about it. I mean, not breaking down, but just, like, going a little bit more into each particular episode rather than broad strokes about the whole game, because the Quake is divided into 4 episodes. This was back when the shareware model was a thing, and each one does have a noticeably different feel from the others, as you might expect, because this was back in the days when a game didn't have to be the exact same thing all the way through with no changes. But yeah, so, first off, gameplay. My first bullet point here is that the weapons feel good. Every weapon in this game just feels nice to use, with the possible exception of the weird axe hammer melee thing that you will not ever use because you will not ever be completely out of all other ammo. I used the hammer axe thing one time in my entire playthrough, and that wasn't because I was completely out of all other ammo. It was just because I ran out of shotgun shells, and that for some reason auto switched me to the hammer, and I didn't have like there was an enemy right there, and I didn't have time to like think for a second to switch to like to check what I did have ammo for and switch to it, you know. So it was just simply a case of I couldn't think quickly enough to switch to a more suitable weapon. Don't use the hammer axe thing. It's trash. But every other weapon feels good. I mean, you start out, your starting pistol is not a pistol, it's a shotgun. It's a regular old shotgun. It feels great. I believe it seems to be hit scan. It's either hit scan or an incredibly fast moving projectile. I'm pretty sure it's hit scan. It's got some spread to it, but it's a good kind of spread. The kind of spread that just makes you feel like you just got to shoot in the general direction of your enemies and you have a good chance of doing something to them, you know? And it's, you know, it's got the sound effects, it's got the animations, it's got the jibs and the blood effects when you hit with it. It feels nice. It's visceral, it's cathartic, it's enjoyable. All of this goes double for the double barrel shotgun. I didn't even plan that, but no, it's good. Your rapid fire options are the nail gun and I want to say it's called the machine gun. It might be called the super nail gun, something like that. But both of these are rapid fire options that fire nails, and they both feel good. They both got nice little multiple barrel rapid fire animations, and the nails are actual projectiles, very fast moving projectiles, but you can see them moving. They are projectiles, which I like. I'm not a big fan of hit scan weapons in general, unless it's a sniper rifle, because obvious reasons. And even then, I would prefer that a sniper rifle actually have physics to it, have bullet physics and drop off and that kind of thing, because that's just more interesting, I think. But you know, obviously a hit scan sniper rifle can be very, very satisfying in the right circumstances. But I digress. Yeah, the nail guns, they shoot nails, which are actual physical projectiles that move through the level. They're modeled, they're polygonal, they're these little triangle thingies, and they're fun to use. And the regular nail gun has two different barrels which will alternate their firing, and it looks nice, it feels nice. And the better one, either the machine gun or the super nail gun or the heavy nail gun or whatever it's called, is your basic Gatling gun. You know, it's got the rotating front of it that's got that shoots through different barrels. I don't know what the purpose of that is exactly. I think that it might have to do, in real life, I think it might have to do with like minimizing overheating in the barrels or something like that, but I could be completely off base. I am not a gun expert, so don't quote me on that. But yeah, you've got, other than those, you've got your grenade launcher and your rocket launcher, both of which are fantastic. Like the grenade launcher feels great. It's got a wonderful arc to it. It takes a little bit of time to learn that arc, but once you do, it's tremendous fun to use. It feels so satisfying to just nail an enemy with a perfectly arced grenade. And the rocket launcher is, I mean, Quake's rocket launcher is like the standard by which all video game rocket launchers are judged. It feels so good to use. It is, you know, it's the progenitor of a lot of other rocket launchers. I mean, there was a Team Fortress 2 rocket launcher that is just the Quake rocket launcher modeled in Team Fortress 2, and for good reason. It's a good rocket launcher. I like it a lot. It's a lot of fun. It makes things explode in jib, and that is fun. Oh, and there's also the lightning gun, I believe it's called, which is exactly what lightning guns are in later Quake games. It fires a steady stream of lightning, which does a holy crap amount of damage. Like, it does crazy damage. The thing does so much damage, it's ridiculous. Don't use it underwater though. I learned that the hard way. I had the lightning gun equipped, and I jumped down into some water and got blindsided by some killer fish, and I was like, oh no, and I just hit the trigger button without thinking, and electrocuted myself. I didn't die, but I went from 100 health to 25. So yeah, don't use the lightning gun in the water. I mean, the fish all did also die in that like half a second of trigger pull, but it wasn't worth it. I haven't actually tested whether you can just shoot the lightning gun into the water and like kill everything in it. I'll have to check that out sometime, because if so, that would be a good pro strat to know. Just kill everything in the water with a little twitch from the lightning gun. But yeah, the lightning gun's really satisfying. It's got these two electrodes at the front, which sometimes have electricity arc between them, and they fire the electricity when you pull the trigger, and it's nice. All of the weapons in this game are just really lovingly animated, and they all have very kinesthetically pleasing firing sequences between the sound of them, the animation of them, the cycling of the machinery, the way that they kick in your hand, the particle effects from firing them. The rockets have some pretty good dynamic lighting applied to them, where when you fire them, like it'll light up the area around them as they're sailing through the air, and even more so as they explode. It's all just really good. And of course, the way that enemies react to being shot is also very good. They still have pain chances like they did in Doom, which is very important to making your weapons feel like they have weight. For those who don't know, the pain chance is when you shoot an enemy in Doom or in Quake, there's like a certain percentage chance that any given hit on them will cause them to do like a little stagger animation where they've kind of been like knocked back or are just reacting in pain to being shot, and it will interrupt whatever attack they're doing. Now, for enemies with high pain chances, like for example the Cacodemon in Doom, this can be really exploited with rapid-firing weapons like the chain gun, because every single shot has that pain chance. So if you're hitting it with a lot of shots at a time, then you can exploit that to have, like, the more shots you get onto it, the higher likelihood that one of those shots is going to stagger it, and you can use that to just basically not give it a chance to attack back. And so it's useful and interesting from a mechanical perspective to kind of remember like what pain chance different enemies have and try to use that to gain an advantage. But one sec, I'm going to take a drink of water before I continue. But it's also very important from a kinesthetic and sort of theming sense, because frankly, it's just satisfying to shoot an enemy with a weapon and have them respond to it as if they have actually been hit by a bullet and are in pain. That's way more satisfying than having them just not do anything, It makes it feel like your weapon really has weight if you shoot something with it and it like reels back and seems to have been actually injured by that hit. It just makes it feel good, and the weapons in this game do feel good. Also, you can jib the hell out of enemies with them. That is one thing that is on display hardcore in this game. There's jibbing all over the place. When you beat the boss of episode 1, and at the end of each level, it gives you like a little results screen, which instead of showing a map of of all of the levels like in Doom, it just shows you a static view from a preset camera angle of the level you just beat. And for the final boss of episode 1, that when it's showing you that static view from a camera angle, it also just has some enemies spawn in midair and just immediately explode in jib as like bloody gory fireworks, and it's great. I love it. But yeah, you can jib enemies all over the place in this game, and anytime an enemy jibs, they will just fly apart into meaty chunks. There was no effort put into like making it seem like a remotely plausible thing. They just wanted it to look cool and satisfying, and it does, and good job. So yeah, the gunplay in this game feels really good, which is like, that is the number one thing that it needed. It needed to have good gunplay, because it is a first-person shooter of the run in and shoot stuff and don't worry about anything else variety, So, box number 1, most important box, checked. And double checked and triple checked. I can't overstate how good this game feels to play. It just feels great. Movement also feels really good. You've got like a real sense of weight to your player. When you move left or right, your guy actually, like, your viewpoint leans in that direction, and it really makes it, like in Doom, you never really felt like a person so much as a floating camera with a gun attached to it that just kind of glides around, and that is no longer the case in Quake. They put a lot of effort into having like your viewpoint bob and sway and do stuff. And it really feels a lot more like you're an actual dude running around in this game, and it's good. So yeah, bullet point 1, everything feels good. It's all great. It all feels very fantastic to play. Point the second, level design. Level design, it's really cool actually. There's a lot of really cool, interesting bits of levels in this game. There's some cool pitfalls. There's some cool excuse me. Some cool secrets. they really took advantage of three-dimensional level design, which is, I'm actually really surprised at how great the level design in this game turned out to be, because this was like bleeding edge early 3D gameplay. Like you know, there were not a lot of 3D games in existence at this point in time, and those ones that did exist tended to have less than exemplary level design. Like, okay, I love me some Super Mario 64, and I think that a lot of the levels in that game are really cool and well designed and fun. That said, they are also incredibly ugly, and most of them are just a square island floating in a void. And that's not like, I mean, that doesn't really hurt the game, but it's just the way it is, because early, you know, it's early 3D level design. What do you know, people hadn't really figured out how to like have the world seem to continue on without it being you know, weird and like kind of uncanny valley, you know. But Quake actually has really good level design. All of it feels like it has a very firm sense of place. You know, anytime there's a place you can't go, it's usually just marked off with like cliffs and whatnot, and it feels kind of claustrophobic. The whole way that the levels are set up, they all loop back around on themselves and have a lot of verticality, and it's really cool. I've tried my hand at three-dimensional first-person shooter level design. I've messed around with Unreal Tournament modding, and it's really hard to get three-dimensional levels to like work well. You know, it's really hard to set them up in a way that feels natural and is also fun to run through and play through. And they really pulled it off in this game, despite it being one of the first examples of it ever. Like, I'm genuinely surprised that they managed to do this without like screwing up one game and having to take another pass at it to make it less shit, because it's a difficult art to learn, and they've really pulled it off for the most part. I mean, I think that the intricacy of the levels is really good. There are a lot of cool little set piece ideas, set piece moments like you get in Doom and Doom 2, but you know, knocked into 12th gear because 3D. I mean, I guess not really. You know, if at the time it felt like it was knocked into 12th gear because 3D. Even now, it is more impressive than the ones in Doom and Doom 2. Although I think some of the ones in Doom and Doom 2 were more like well designed from a holding their relevance from a replaying and looking back standpoint. I think that a lot of the ones in Quake can feel kind of quaint. It's like, oh look, they managed to do something with 3 dimensions. That's nice. But yeah, no, they're fun levels. They've got a good look to them. You know, lots of like mixing and matching of like tech and gothic kind of stuff, and it's pretty neat. You got castles, you got stained glass windows, all that good stuff. You got raised platforms with enemies on them, and year one raised platforms above enemies. You know, playing with verticality. It's cool. It's cool levels for the most part. My one big problem with the levels is, I don't know. I don't even know if I'd call it that big of. It's a problem. It's whether it's that big or not is up to you. But sometimes there's just like the level is set up in a way where you cannot avoid taking falling damage. Like, you will just fall a certain distance and you will take damage at the bottom, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you know, that's like, I think that's really just kind of showing how early and experimental Quake was for 3D shooters, because nowadays, if there was like a point in a game where you were just forced to take damage and there was nothing you can do about it just due to how the level is set up, especially if it was due to something as dumb as falling damage, that would not be acceptable and it would be railed against. But back in the day, falling damage was a new concept, so like just interacting with it at all was an interesting thing. But yeah, I don't think that particular aspect has aged well. I think the game would be better if it didn't force you to take falling damage in certain levels. And with that, I guess we're kind of getting into some of my gripes with how the game is set up in the gameplay. Point the third, I don't know if this exactly goes in the gameplay department. It didn't seem to really fit any of the departments, so I just picked one. But tutorials. You get little tutorial pop-up texts in this game. It doesn't do a lot in the way of invisible tutorialization. Well, I mean, I guess it does, but it's just there are certain points where it fails to do that well, and it has to resort to actually tutorializing by just popping a message up on screen. I mean, when you first play the first level, like the opening level, like it has like when you step to a certain area, it has a tutorial pop up that says, hey, you can jump across here, and then you go somewhere else and it's like, hey, there's a secret door here, shoot it. And it's very brute force tutorialization, you know. And that's fine, I guess. But when it really becomes a problem is later into the game. It'll introduce like a mechanic or a concept without a tutorial, and you just kind of feel your way around and figure it out, which I did obviously because I beat the game and I never looked up a walkthrough or anything like that. But yeah, so you just gotta kind of feel it out and just kind of figure out how it works, and then you got it. But then later on, you'll run into that same concept, like later in the same episode, and you'll get a tutorial pop up for it, even though you've already encountered it and had to learn to deal with it before. Like in episode 4, I believe it was, there was a point where in order to progress in the level, you needed to shoot this big red window, which would cause it to open and reveal a tunnel that you could go through to hit like a switch to open a door or some shit. And it took me a while to figure it out because the door or the window just looked like window dressing. But no, it just looked like a piece of set dressing, and so that I figured it out, but it took me a bit. And then in the very next level, like right at the beginning of that level, you run across an identical window, and when you walk up to it, it's like, hey, you can shoot this window to open it. It's like, oh, thanks for letting me know. I could have taken knowing that 10 minutes ago in the last level. That would have been nice. But I guess. I mean, my guess would probably be that some of these levels were set up to be in a certain order, and then they decided to change the order and forgot to like switch around the tutorial pop-ups or whatever. It's not a huge problem. It's just kind of a little nitpick of a niggle. It's just like, oh man, you kind of screwed up there, didn't you? But yeah, and then the fourth of category, the first is enemies. Some of them are not great. Some of them are really good. I think that the weak enemies, the like low tier enemies, are all fun to fight. You got some regular dude mans with guns that try to shoot you and they don't take much damage. You got some slightly stronger dude mans with guns who try to shoot you and take a little more damage. The slightly stronger ones use projectile weapons instead of hit scan ones, so so it feels like a fair increase to the challenge where they do more damage, but you have the possibility to dodge, which I think is a step up from how Doom handled it. Because in Doom, the second tier enemies, like the low tier enemies, the former humans that are just dudes with pistols, whatever, screw them. They're pathetic. You can kill them in like one shotgun blast. I guess you can do that with the former commanders too, but the point, or the former sergeants too, but the point is they're piss easy. They don't take many hits and they don't do that much damage, so whatever. And then the next step up, the former sergeants, are actually harder than what I consider the tier 3 enemies, which are the imps. Because the imps, you can completely avoid damage from them by dodging their fireballs, but the former sergeants, they have hit scan shotguns that do actually quite a lot of damage if they hit. And they like put a dude in a room with put a dude in a room and drop 5 former sergeants on him without giving him any warning, and he's probably going to die because they actually have really high damage output, and it's really hard to avoid that damage. The only thing you can really do is just kill them faster, which isn't easy to do if there are multiple of them. So I think that this game handles its second tier enemies better than Doom does, because they do more damage, but you can actually avoid that damage feasibly. So props for that. There's also some dog enemies, which they just run up and bite you, and they're cool. They're fine. They're doggos. They're good doggos. They look like Rottweilers, like evil Rottweilers, evil demon Rottweilers. They're fun. And a lot of most of the enemies that you encounter in episode 1 are pretty alright. There are these ogre dudes, I believe. I think they're called ogres. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't feel like looking up the enemy names from Quake, but the dudes that have a chainsaw on one hand and they throw grenades at you, the big dudes that start showing up in level 2 of episode 1, I believe. They're fine mostly. I don't know. I feel like having a grenade enemy introduced that early in the game is like a little bit like kind of cagey, something that I feel a little bit uncomfortable with. It's like, oh, are you sure about that? But I mean, I dealt with them fine, so it can't have been that big of an issue. I think that sometimes their grenades can be a little bit overly difficult to avoid, and I think because they move pretty quick. And I think that it would have gone a long way to make this enemy feel fairer if their grenades hadn't detonated on impact with you like yours do with them. But, it's fine. Again, I managed to deal with them even as a new babby to this game who was just getting into level 2, so they can't have been that big of an issue, There's the fiends, which are just these these demon spawn things that just they leap at you with their big sharp front legs and try to gore you, and they're pretty cool. They're pretty fun. You gotta dodge around them and stuff. It's good stuff. You got some knight dudes that have their arms appear to be amputated and one replaced with a sword. They're all right. You know, they're just a basic ass melee enemy. Some of the more interesting enemies, I think, are there are these. I think they're like some kind of undead thing. They might be like called a zombie or something like that, but they're just this emaciated corpse that throws projectiles at you. And their gimmick is that you can kill them with any weapon, but if the corpse is left there, then it'll reanimate after a little bit. The only way to kill them permanently is to jib them, which most of the time can only really be done with a grenade unless you have a quad damage power up. So I think that's actually a really interesting enemy because it's a very low tier enemy that doesn't take much damage at all, but due to the way that it is set up and designed, you have to approach it a certain way or else no amount of firepower will be effective unless it's enough to jib it. I think that's actually really interesting, and when you put that together with other enemy types, you got to kind of juggle, you know, how you should be approaching these enemies, because for these guys, grenades are king, but for certain other enemies, you might want to go with a nail gun or a shotgun, depending on what you're dealing with and how far away it is from you. You know, it's just, it's a good example of orthogonal enemy design, where it's not just, oh, it's a stronger or weaker enemy with more or less health. No, this is an enemy that actually functions differently from every other enemy, and you have to kill it a certain way. And not like a super gimmicky way, like the, I don't know if you guys have ever played the Borderlands 2 DLC, where it was a D&D game that was being run by Tiny Tina. I played that one. It was not good. And one of the enemies in it is like this undead minotaur, where it's just a minotaur skeleton that has a sword stuck in it, and it'll keep reanimating unless you pull the sword out of it when you kill it. And that's an example of how to do this concept wrong, where it's not like utilizing the mechanics in an interesting way. It's just adding in a new mechanic that is completely contextual and never used at any other point in the game. It's dumb. I'm gonna take another drink of water here, but yeah. I think that the way that the zombie things are handled in this game is actually really cool. It's a completely different type of enemy that hasn't been seen in Doom. I haven't played a whole lot of the late 90s first-person shooters, so I can't, well, mid to late, so I can't like really tell whether that is like a completely original idea that was never in any other shooter at the time, but it definitely wasn't in Doom, which I've played a lot of, so, you know, it's new to me. But no, I think it was cool and interesting, and I think it was a good idea. What else we got? We got, oh yeah, we got the weird, like, worm things that fly through the air and shoot at you, and they're okay. I mean, they're basically just a pretty standard projectile enemy, but they can fly, so that's interesting. I mean, not, like, interesting as in, like, a new concept, but it differentiates them from other enemies in terms of how they function, because they have a lot more mobility, you know? So, you know, it's good enemy design. I think that the first enemy that I butted my head up against that I really had any sort of a problem with was this big ogre thing that what it does is it generates some lightning in its hand and then shoots it at you. And I don't like it because that lightning is hit scan. It does a lot of damage, and it'll hit you instantly, and it's just entirely based on line of sight. So the way you fight this thing is you wail on him, and anytime you see him charge up his lightning, you get out of sight of him. And I hate those kinds of enemies in these kinds of old run and gun shooters, because the idea of just like watching for him putting his arms above his head and doing a magic thing and taking cover immediately and just sticking behind that wall is like the exact opposite of how I want to play these games. I don't want to hide from shots, I want to dodge them, you know? I hate Archviles in Doom 2 for this exact same reason. They're basically the same enemy, honestly, except this guy can't resurrect other enemies as far as I know. But yeah, I don't like it. I hate it. I think it's a not fun enemy to fight. I don't enjoy it. Also later on, there are these spidery kind of dudes that they shoot like a magic spike ball at you, which is basically a homing rocket, but like it homes way harder than the homing rockets from the Revenants did in Doom 2. So it effectively is also an Archvile shot, where you also effectively have to just put cover between yourself and it, because that's the only way you can possibly hope to avoid damage. So again, I don't like it. I don't like taking cover in these games. I don't think that's a fun. I don't think that it fits the mechanics. I don't think that it fits the tone. It's not my playstyle. I don't enjoy it. I don't want to do it. So yeah, both of those enemies get a D from me because they force me to play in a way that I don't think is fun, and I just tend to find them frustrating. What else is there for an? Oh yeah, the spawn. Fuck the spawn. It's so bad. It's terrible. I hate it. It is this little gray blob enemy that's really hard to see because it's usually in dark areas, and it just sits there on the ground until you get close to it, at which point it just freaks out and just is bouncing all over the place everywhere, and it's so hard to keep track of. And when you kill it, it explodes for a lot of damage in a pretty wide radius, so you gotta get far away from it and then hit it from a distance. And oh god, I hate it so much. It's so bad. It's the most, like, there's nothing fun about it. It's just either you know where it is and you take it out preemptively, or you don't know where it is, you get surprised by it, and you have to just deal with this clusterfuck of an enemy. I hate it. It's so bad. There's just like, there's no, the only way to consistently be able to deal with it is to just memorize where it will appear in the level and like peek out from behind a corner and kill it before it has a chance to aggro. It's not good. I don't like it at all. The spawn should not have existed. But yeah, aside from some of the enemy design being less than perfect, this game is also severely lacking in the boss department. Like, this game has 2 bosses and they're both garbage because neither of them uses the game's primary mechanics. So you beat episode 1, and the final boss of episode 1 is this Cthulhian demon monster called Chthon or something like that. It's Chthon, and I assume that the ch is a ch and the th is a th, so I pronounce it Chthon. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's how I say it. It could have been a cool fight. It's a big lava monster sitting in a pool of lava that shoots lava rocks at you. That could be fun. But the problem is, 1, the lava rocks are incredibly slow-moving projectiles, and it does not lead its shots in any way. It just throws directly at you. So, in order to avoid damage, just don't ever stop moving. If you don't stop moving, it can't hit you. And 2, you don't get to shoot it to death or use the primary mechanics of the game. Instead, you gotta find your way up to an upper level, and once you're up there, there are 3 buttons. There's 2 on either side of him, or 1 on either side of him, which correspond to these big, like, electric rod metal stick things above him. You hit each button on either side of him and it lowers the metal rods, and you hit the other button that's in front of him at any time and it'll electrify the 2 rods and make electricity blast across between them. So to beat this guy, you run to the 2 buttons on either side of him to put the lightning rods in place, and then you hit the other button to electrocute him, and then the rods go back to where they were, and you gotta do the whole thing over again 3 times. It's so boring. You literally fight this boss by running in circles around the room 3 times. It's so bad. It's super boring. It doesn't use any of, like, it doesn't use the basic mechanics at all. If you know what you're doing in, like, if you first walk into this boss for the first time, you can be forgiven for wanting to shoot it because it's a boss in a balls to the wall shooter by id. But, once you understand, like, how the boss works and what the actual way to beat it is, you will never fire a shot in this room because there is nothing to shoot that you can actually affect. It's terrible. I hate it so much. Chthon is an awful boss. It's boring. It doesn't use the main mechanics. It's boring, and it's boring. God, it's so boring. I hate it so much. Episode 2 doesn't even have a boss. You get to the end of the level and it just spawns in 2 of those spidery dudes. Now, this is the first time the spidery dudes are introduced, so it's sort of like a climax thing where it's like, oh, here's some new enemies. But then you go into episode 3 and those guys are just regular enemies now. So it's like, oh, well, that's not a boss then. That was just introducing a new enemy type. Yeah, boring, lame. I hate it. Episode 3, you get to the end, and it doesn't even introduce a new enemy. You get the rune on a bridge, and then it spawns a fiend in on either side of the bridge, in front of and behind you. And in order to survive, you just gotta jump down onto a lower bridge because otherwise you have no chance of surviving the encounter. So there, it just like pulls an ambush on you, which is bullshit, and is like, all right, now jump down and backtrack your way through like 10 seconds of level for just because we decided to spawn in some early game enemies just to be cheeky instead of putting in a boss. It's terrible. I hate it. And then at the end of episode 4, there's not a boss, but after you beat episode 4, it opens up to the door to the final boss. So you can consider the final boss to be the episode 4 boss. And that is Shub-Niggurath, I believe is how it's pronounced. I could be wrong, but it's this Cthulhu monster that is like It's like a big fleshy stump, and all you do is you fight your way through its lair, which is just full of it's full of just a bunch of annoying enemies in tight quarters that's just like really annoying to get through. Also, there's a bunch of traps that you just have no chance of seeing until you've tripped them once. Well, actually, some of them you have a chance of seeing, but one in particular you have no chance of noticing until you've already tripped it once. But yeah, you fight your way through a bunch of regular enemies, and then you reach this teleporter that like teleports you to the position of this metal spike ball that is floating around the room. And if you just like jump into the teleporter to see where it goes, 9 times out of 10 that's just going to drop you into the lava, because most of the room is lava. So first of all, you get killed for experimenting with this teleporter, despite the fact that that's what you're supposed to do when you see a teleporter and it's unclear where it goes. But then once you figure out how it works and that the teleporter is putting you on the spike ball, that is how you beat the boss. You wait for the spike ball to be overlapping with the boss, like part of its path takes it through the boss, where it's literally just like clipping through it, and you just have to teleport into the boss while the spike ball is in there, and you'll telefrag her. Now, it's cool that as far as I know, this is the first recorded instance of a telefrag, and that's historic, but it's really lame as a final boss to not have a big climactic showdown where you have to dodge and shoot, and instead you just teleport into it and it instantly dies. Ah, God. All of the bosses, of which there are literally 2 in this game, are just terrible and boring, and I don't like them. They're not fun. Bad show. But anyway, that concludes category 1 gameplay. On to the second one, which is context, aesthetic, narrative things. I'm gonna take another drink before moving on. My throat is getting sore. So yeah, first off, the aesthetic of this game is cool. It's got like this, I mentioned this earlier, but it's got like this really kind of unique mixture of like techie kind of stuff and gothic horror stuff. Like you got castles, and you got Lovecraft demons, and you got like moats and drawbridges, but then you've also got like it's futuristic tech-based stuff, and you play as a space marine. You know, you're using like futuristic shotguns and machine guns and rocket launchers and a lightning gun, but then your power-ups are like, well, there's quad damage, which isn't like, it's not anything, and it's literally just a Quake logo that quadruples your damage for no reason. I'm not knocking it, it's cool, but it's just like it's not like an in-universe thing, it's just the Quake logo. But your in-universe power-ups are you've got the Pentagram of Protection, which is this magical pentagram that gives you 666 armor, making you immune to all damage. That's your invulnerability power. And, you know, it's done in like a black magic kind of way, so that's kind of interesting thematically. And then you have an invisibility power-up, which is the Ring of Shadows, which is just, it's straight up the One Ring from Lord of the Rings. Like, that's just what it's a simple gold ring that makes you invisible. God damn it, I need to silence my phone. Don't you... I hope you didn't come to this channel for any sort of remote professionalism. Why is Patreon sending me an email that Endless just became a patron of Dick Masterson? I don't care. Anyway, why would I care? Anyway, yeah, so you got, you know, so yeah, the Ring of Shadows it's just straight up the One Ring. And these are both, like, you know, fantasy things, but then but you're playing as a space marine with guns, and sometimes the levels are tech bases, and it's kind of interesting that you've got like this mix of aesthetics. I mean, if I had to criticize this game's aesthetic, it would be that it is a very brown game, aside from the sky, which is purple and looks great and cool. But like most of the game is very brown. The water's brown, the walls are brown, the floor is brown, the grass is brown, everything's brown. But there is like some contrast to the brown. There are some brighter colors, and the way that the brown is used, it's not like a lot of modern games where like they just use brown to be a shorthand for gritty realism. Here it's to kind of underscore the sort of like kind of a B horror movie kind of tone, honestly. I don't know, maybe not so much B-horror, but like definitely a horror tone. This game is definitely more horror than Doom was, which is kind of saying something, honestly. But yeah, it's used to like underscore the kind of violent and horror themed and Lovecraftian elements of the game, rather than trying to just be, oh, we're gritty and realistic. So, you know, it's cool. I mean, the It does get fatiguing to see brown everywhere, but I think that they handled it well. That so yeah, the aesthetic is pretty cool. That said, that point that I touched upon earlier about how it's kind of got like some Lovecraft stuff in there and some gothic horror and some sci-fi and yeah, yeah, this game is completely incoherent. Like, Doom mixed some of these elements. Like, it definitely mixed, you know, the hell. I hope that that didn't come pick up on the microphone. There was just some noise somewhere in the apartment. Anyway, Doom kind of mixed sci-fi tech-basy kind of stuff with some more like you know, demons from hell and that kind of elements, and it definitely worked really well there. And I think that the reason it worked well was because the story was about these things coming together. Like, they weren't just there next to each other apropos of nothing. The story was about demons from hell invading a space base, you know? It was like people in this universe didn't know about these things until they started invading from another dimension. So it's like, okay, so the point is that these conflicting elements are now clashing together, and that's kind of part of the theming, right? Quake doesn't have any of that. Quake is just like, yeah, there's magic and there's guns and there's tech and it's whatever. You got slip gates. They might be magic or they might be tech. It's kind of unclear. You just got all this stuff in here and it's just there. You know, go wild, and that's fine, I guess. But yeah, it does feel like really kind of just, okay, what the hell is even supposed to be going on here? And that's not helped by the fact that one sec. Okay. That's not helped by the fact that the plot in this game is like, it's really poorly set up and hard to follow, even in comparison with Doom. I mean, I'll put it this way. You don't find out what the evil villain is trying to do until the end of episode 4. Like, at the end of episode 1, you get the first rune and you're like, what the hell is this? And the game's like, oh, it's one of the runes, you gotta collect 4 of them. And it's like, okay, why? I don't know, beat another episode and maybe I'll tell you. So you beat another episode and it says some more stuff that doesn't really matter to anything, and then you beat another episode and it tells you about how the villain is called Shub-Niggurath, and so that's a thing, I guess. So now we know who the villain is 3/4 of the way through the game. And then you get to the end of episode 4 and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, the Shub-Niggurath's plan is to wipe out all life on Earth and replace all of the humanity with monsters like you've been fighting. It's like, oh, okay. So I am now at the end of the game. I am right before the final boss, and I now finally know what is happening and why I'm trying to stop it. Cool. Good. Thanks. Yeah, no, the plot of this game is the plot didn't seem to have a huge amount of time of like thought into it in Doom, but it seems like it was just like a complete and total afterthought in this one. Which is weird, because according to what I've been told about the development of this game, they were actually planning on it having like a completely different and much more involved plot originally. So maybe it wasn't so much that the plot was an afterthought as they thought up of a plot and then ended up only implementing part of it because of because of complications during development or something. Either way, though, the plot is completely, like, it's not nonsense or anything. Like, once you've gotten to the end of the game and beaten it, you can basically understand what's happening, sort of. But, like, you have no understanding of what the world is like by default. You only know what it's like now in the hellscape. Like, in Doom, you can just kind of assume, well, before that, it was a sci-fi place, you know? It was, you know, there was a Mars base, people were peaceful on Earth, there was a space armada, you know, there was a space military. You know, you can assume that it was just, you know, standard sci-fi future, right? But with this, it's like, okay, so what about, so like these magic elements, were those a thing before? Because everybody seems to kind of know, or not everybody, but your guy seems to already kind of know about like what the runes are and everything. So I don't know, is magic just normal in this world, and is it only just now becoming a problem? Is that why all of the levels are already gothic from the start instead of becoming more hellish like they did in Doom? I don't know. It's not clear. It's just unclear. This game's story is very unclear about everything. I mean, that's not a huge problem. No, people don't play Quake for the story, but I think it's worth mentioning that it managed to be a significant step down from Doom in terms of story. Doom being the game where the story is demons are invading from hell, go kill them. Like at least in Doom you knew what you were doing and why, and it made sense. But yeah, other than that, there's some cool, like, there's some ideas that aren't really anything mechanically, but they're cool from like an aesthetic and thematic viewpoint. In episode 3, there were these like wind tunnels where you jump in them and they whisk you off to another part of the level. Functionally, they're basically the same as teleporters, but they look cooler because you're flying through them. So that was kind of neat. But there were also some like ideas that were kind of dumb and probably should have been left on the cutting room floor, like strobe tunnels where you go in and the lights flash really quick and it's just disorienting and weird, and I don't like it. Yeah, I don't know. The game has a cool aesthetic, and it's got some neat ideas in its plot and in its like theming and whatnot, but it all feels like it feels kind of underdeveloped and kind of incoherent at times, and again, the brand does get fatiguing. So yeah, that's about as much as I have to say about the theming and the context for this game. So category the third, we've got let's just go through the episodes. Episode the first is it's a solid. It's just solid. It introduces you to the game, and it like makes sure that you understand the mechanics. It's got some good levels in it. It's got some cool castles. It's got some fun caves to dive through. It's got waterways to wade through and whatnot. It's a fun level pack. It's a good episode. It was a good choice for the shareware because it is kind of a vertical slice of what the game as a whole is like. It's solid. It's fun. I liked it. Episode 2, I think, is kind of weaker, mostly just because it gets a little fiddly. It kind of has more of a tendency towards like putting you into fights with multiple enemies in really cramped quarters where you don't really have room to maneuver around very much, and you definitely cannot use your explosives because you will kill yourself with splash damage. I don't know, it just seemed less fun to me. But it's fine. It's a good, it's a good map pack. Episode 3, I think, is probably the best one. It had some really cool and interesting ideas. That was the one that had the wind tunnels in it, and a few other like neat little gimmicks and set pieces. So it was a fun level. It starts off right off the bat with like a super easy level at the beginning of episode 3, where you just run through and just mow through all of the low tier enemies, and that was fun. That was just a lot of fun, especially after having gotten a little bit frustrated with episode 2. It was great to be able to just sit back and just decimate these enemy soldiers. So, it was good job. I think that episode 3 was probably the best paced right up until the point where they just dropped 2 fiends on you instead of giving you a boss. Episode 4 can go fuck itself, honestly. Episode 4 kind of just over-relied on just, hey, you walked over an invisible tripwire, here's 1,000 enemies to fight. And they're all around you, you're surrounded, good luck. And that just gets annoying, and it's not very fun. Also, this one particular level, I think it was called the Maze of the Pain Maze. Maybe it was the Palace of Hate. I don't remember, but it is this level where there's spawns everywhere. They're all over the place. Like, you'll go through a room and there will be like 1 or 2 spawns in it, and you take them out and you continue on and you solve a puzzle. And then your path takes you back through that same room, and you figure, oh, this is the same room, it'll be safe, and you walk in and there's like 7 new spawns, and they're everywhere, and they're all killing you right now. Oh god, it's so bad. Fuck spawns. I hate them, and this whole level is like designed around just dropping them on you at every opportunity. It's so bad. I hate it. And again, the only way to deal with spawns is to just die once, and then figure out where they are and attack preemptively. Which actually is how most of the encounters in episode 4 are done, in my experience. Let me take a drink before I expand on that. But yeah, I found that a lot of the time in episode 4, encounters were just designed in a way that felt kind of unfair. Like you were just having a bunch of enemies sprung on you, and there wasn't much you could do about it unless you saw it coming. So yeah, 9 times out of 10 with any given encounter in episode 4, the way that I would beat it would be to just take a stab, die, come back again knowing where all the enemies are going to be, and just win. Because I can attack them all preemptively because I know where they are before they even know that I exist. So yeah, episode 4 was, I think, probably the weakest of the 4. But, episode 3 was really good. Episode 2 was a lot of fun. Episode 2 was pretty good. Even episode 4 was still, like, it was basically fun to play through. I I just ended up leaning a lot harder on the quick save key than in the earlier ones, and I ended up getting more frustrated. Episode 4 was also the one where sometimes the way forward was just not very well signposted, and it just got annoying trying to figure out like where do I go to continue forward. But yeah, so yeah, that's basically most of my impressions of Quake, having played through it once. I mean, it's a very solid game. I would definitely, excuse me, I drank too much water at once, and now I got like some gas roiling around in my stomach there, making me burp. But yeah, I would definitely recommend picking up Quake. You can get it for really cheap on Steam. Hold on, let me check how cheap exactly you can get it for on Steam. Let's see. I gotta get my Steam Guard code. Wait for Steam to come up. All right. Anyway, yeah. Go to come on. Where's my Steam interface lagging? There should be no reason for that. There we go. Yeah. Quake. Visit store page. Yeah, you can buy Quake for $5 on Steam. I would recommend getting the Dark Places source port. You can very easily use it with the Steam version of the game by just replacing the WinQuake, which is Windows Quake exe, with the Dark Places exe, and just rename Dark Places exe to WinQuake exe, and then Steam will automatically use it. There's a community guide on Steam that explains this, and it's very simple and easy to follow. I don't suspect that any of you will have any difficulty with it, because it is very easy. But yeah, and yeah, just pick it up. It's only $5. You can get it made. You can make it, completely and totally playable on modern systems at whatever resolution you want with one simple source port input, and it's good. It's not as good as Doom. It's not a 10 out of 10 game. I would say it's a solid shooter with some problems, and if you're going into it expecting it to be like the successor to Doom, like another game that does things as perfectly as Doom does, and is as huge of a revolution and holds up just as well as Doom, you're gonna be disappointed. Quake is not as good as Doom, but it's a very solid first-person shooter from 1996, I want to say. The Steam user, or the Steam store page, isn't telling me the actual release date. It's telling me when it released on Steam, which was 2007. Let me go ahead and just like Google when it came out initially. Yeah, the Quake release date is June 22nd, 1996. So yeah, it's a very good 1996 shooter. If you're looking for a 1996 shooter, Quake is your game. It's fun. It's fun to play. It's not perfect. It's got problems. It's not as good as Doom, but I like it. It's fun. I need to think of like a better way to end these. But yeah, just go give Quake a spin if it sounds like your thing. Again, it's $5. It's cheap. Play it. This has been So I Just Finished Quake, a Last Impressions podcast, and that's all for now, I guess. Jeez, I'm so bad at ending videos.